It's been nearly 2 years since the first Paris attacks. We've had so much that's happened since, all the way to what was experienced at that Christmas market in the German capital just a few short weeks ago. Looking back, has counterintelligence learned lessons? If so, what are they?
Well, first of all, it's been indeed the lessons learned. It's to make sure that they actually notice them. It's not just a lot of the things that were mentioned after these attacks were mentioned before. The question is, were they properly taken into account? I would say from the French perspective, it's very slow. There's been a lot of knee-jerk reactions. You've seen it with the state of emergency over the last year. It's not brought much. In Germany, they like to take their time a bit more. You've seen other European countries try to step up their measures, in Belgium as well. But I think despite the increase in number of attacks throughout Europe, a lot of the security agencies, the security forces are still in the assessment phase, trying to properly understand what the lessons are and how to properly define solutions for them.
So hang on, you're saying that the state of emergency, which by the way is still in effect since the attacks of November 2015, you're saying that's been ineffective?
So far, it's been ineffective. I think a lot of French people know there's been still a few attempts, a few attacks that have succeeded despite the presence of the army in the country. And a lot of the attacks that were foiled were actually thanks to the vigilance of citizens. So what it's resulted into is that the army and the police officers have been overwhelmed. They're stretched out. They're exhausted, to say the least. And so that's been more of a cosmetic change rather than proper lessons learned. Let's impose a proper solution to it.
So how should authorities have recalibrated after the first Charlie Hebdo attack?
Well, so far they've tried to improve the collaboration between the different agencies. That takes some time because one of the lessons learned has been, well, we can't, we've been doing this for X amount of years, no longer applies. So there's a lot of confusion to it. There's a lot of the generation conflict on how things should be done. So that they've tried to handle this. They've tried to give more powers to the security agencies, try to provide them with more personnel. But all of this takes time. Basically, it comes down to you're trying to play catch up. And trying to play catch up, that means you're going to throw a lot of things into the pot that aren't necessarily going to work. And they're going to take time, which is something they had before this wave of attacks, which they no longer have now.
St-Pierre, there's a lot of arguments there that you mentioned. On the one hand, do you have everything under one roof, or does each service keep its own turf? And also the argument over that counterintelligence effort, how much of it is electronic and how much of it is down to, old school, getting more human bodies focused on preventing further attacks?
Well, one of the quickest ways and also one of the cheapest ways, of course, has been to try to improve the electronic surveillance, to try to improve the collection of data. That's, again, been a knee-jerk reaction because there's a lot, the jury's still out on the effectiveness of this. Despite hiring more police officers, more police presence, what's been missing so far is really an increase in number of analysts. And that's nothing, you can try to hire new people right now. The fact is they won't be ready until a year, 2 years, or in Germany, as they say, 3 years from now. So that takes some time. Unfortunately, you can hire people, you can try to focus on electronic to try to buy some time, trying to compensate with the human factor for the years to come. But that's a very difficult balancing act, especially in an election year like next year in Germany, France, and the Netherlands.
And I want to get back to something you said at the outset. German authorities more deliberate in whether or not to increase powers for their intelligence services. Tell us more about that argument, and where do you think it's going in Germany?
Well, the biggest problem in Germany right now has been the federal system in itself in terms of security. It's been there's been a lot of conflict between the Länder, the provinces, so to speak, their own powers versus the one of the national government. And what they're trying to change, and this is one of the suggestions that Minister de Maizière proposed, is trying to do away with some of that local structure. But that's been difficult. It doesn't mean you have to throw the baby away with the rest of the bathwater, but it's, some of these changes take time. There's been a lot of warnings on this. Germany's trying to focus on this. There's going to be an inquiry into what needs to be done, and this is very important. I think right now cooler heads need to prevail in terms of what needs to be done into a proper reform, rather than just a few of knee-jerk reactions like we've seen in other countries.
It's now coming to light that the German Christmas market attacker transited through Brussels. Jan St-Pierre, how do you think the investigation has gone all told?
I think it's gone as you would expect it to go. The thing is, we all have, this day and age where everything's pretty much instantaneous, we want results to be fast, but that's one of those elements where balancing expectations toward reality, and the reality is things like this take time, because no matter how many cameras you have around the world or around the city or around a country, you need to look at that film. Looking at that film takes some time. You need to identify the proper person within that film, within the framework. So I think it's going about pretty much as you would expect it to be, but the thing is, we all want answers as fast as possible, and the more time it takes, the worse security forces look, especially that it looks like he really went on the run and was spotted everywhere. So this is definitely a black eye for European security agencies.